I remember that day like it was yesterday. The air conditioning hummed in that boardroom, while I waited silently, resume in hand. Getting to this interview had cost me months of effort, hundreds of ignored applications, and dozens of rejections. But finally, I was there, at the headquarters of Tech Innovate, the most important technology company in New York City. "Martinez, right? Carlos Martinez," said Jason Fuller, the HR director, without even looking me in the eye as he lazily reviewed my resume. I nodded nervously, adjusting the tie I had bought specially for this occasion. It was the only one I owned, but I had saved for 3 months to afford it. Computer science degree. State University of New Mexico. He muttered in a tone that betrayed his disapproval. I felt my hopes beginning to fade. I knew that tone. I had heard it many times before. Sitting across from me were 3 executives in impeccable suits, wearing watches that probably cost more than my annual rent, and that look of superiority that only people who've never had to worry about making ends meet can have. Jason Fuller in the center, Amanda Reynolds, the operations director, to his right, and Richard Blackwell, vice president of development, to his left. "You know, we received over 200 applications for this position," Amanda commented while playing with her designer pen. "Most candidates come from MIT, Stanford, or Caltech. We even have graduates from Oxford and Cambridge." I swallowed hard. My state university, though it had given me a decent education, couldn't compete with those names. But I knew I could code better than most. I knew it because I had spent countless nights practicing, learning on my own, building projects from scratch while working part-time at a coffee shop to pay for my shared room in Queens. "Your experience is limited," continued Richard, flipping through my resume with disdain. 2 years at a startup that went bankrupt, some freelance projects, nothing really noteworthy. That startup failed because the founder embezzled funds, not because our product failed, I dared to respond. In fact, the code I wrote is still the foundation of 3 applications currently on the market. Jason let out a condescending chuckle. Sure. Everyone says something similar. But understand, at Tech Innovate, we're looking for profiles. How should I put it? More in line with our corporate image. I knew exactly what that meant. People from their social circle, from the right universities, with the right connections. People who didn't grow up in a small town in New Mexico like me, where reliable internet didn't arrive until I was 15, and where my first computer was a used machine that my father, a construction worker, bought by sacrificing 3 months of his salary. "My code speaks for itself," I insisted, pulling out my tablet. "If you'll allow me to show you the project I've been working on." Amanda looked at her watch impatiently. "I think we've seen enough. We appreciate your time, but honestly, I don't think you're the profile we're looking for." I felt a lump in my throat. I needed this job. My mother was sick, and her diabetes medications were becoming increasingly expensive. My younger sister dreamed of going to college, and I had promised I would help her in ways none of us had been helped. "Please," I persisted, "just 5 minutes to show you my project. It's a data compression algorithm that improves mobile application performance by 40%. Richard sighed with annoyance. "Look, Carlos, right? It's not just a technical matter. At Tech Innovate, we're a family. We're looking for people who fit in, who share our vision, our values." "I perfectly understand your values," I replied, feeling frustration mixing with anger. "Hard work, dedication, technical excellence. I've dedicated every spare minute of my life to perfecting my skills." Jason abruptly closed my folder. "We appreciate your interest in Tech Innovate. We'll send you an email if something appropriate for your profile comes up." His tone made it clear that email would never arrive. I slowly stood up, collecting my tablet and folder. I had traveled 2 hours by subway and bus to get to this interview. I had rehearsed my answers over and over, all for nothing. As I walked toward the door, I heard Richard mutter something about these small-town guys who don't know their place. I pretended not to hear, but each word stabbed into my chest like a dagger. In the elevator, I took a deep breath, trying to hold back tears of frustration. This wasn't the first door that had closed on me, but it hurt especially because I knew I had the talent and skills. What I didn't have was the right last name, the right university, the right accent. I left the imposing glass and steel building on Park Avenue and sat on a bench in the nearby park. The late afternoon sun fell on the city as I stared at that skyscraper that symbolized everything that seemed unattainable for someone like me. It was then that I made a decision that would change my life forever. I wouldn't give up. I wouldn't let people like Jason Fuller, Amanda Reynolds, or Richard Blackwell define my worth. If they wouldn't give me a chance, I would create one myself. I didn't need their approval or validation. As I watched the Tech Innovate building, an idea began to form in my mind. An ambitious, almost impossible idea. But when you have nothing to lose, the limits of what's possible expand. That night, I couldn't sleep. Words of rejection echoed in my head while my fingers flew across the keyboard. My roommate, Mike, looked at me with concern when he saw me coding at 3 a.m, my eyes red and a determination bordering on obsession. "They rejected you again, didn't they?" he asked, sitting beside me with a cup of cheap coffee. "This time was different," I answered without taking my eyes off the screen. This time it was personal. I told him about the interview, about how they had looked down on me, about Richard's comment about small-town guys. "Those jerks are always like that," Mike said, shrugging. "The world is designed for them, not for us. Accept it and move on." But I couldn't accept it. I didn't want to accept it. All my life I had fought against that mindset, against the idea that my destiny was predetermined by where I was born or which school I attended. "I'm going to create my own company," I told Mike, surprising even myself with the firmness in my voice. "I have an algorithm that can revolutionize how applications process data. I've been developing it for months." Mike looked at me with a mixture of compassion and skepticism. "Carlos, let's be realistic. You need capital, connections, a team, and all that requires money we don't have." He was right, of course, but I had something that Jason, Amanda, and Richard couldn't buy with all their money: the tenacity of someone who has had to fight for every opportunity in life. "I'm entering the Tech Summit Hackathon next week," I told him. "The prize is $10,000 and the chance to pitch to investors." Mike patted my shoulder. "Good luck with that. But don't get your hopes up. Those events are always won by the same people. But this time would be different. It had to be different. For the next 7 days, I barely slept. I refined my algorithm, developed a functional prototype, rehearsed my presentation until every word, every gesture was perfectly calibrated for maximum impact. The day of the hackathon arrived. The event was held in a convention center in Midtown, another symbol of that New York inaccessible to most, designed for the economic and technological elite. I arrived early, laptop under my arm and stomach tight with nerves and hunger. I hadn't eaten properly in days, investing every available dollar in improving my equipment and transportation to this place. As I set up my booth, I observed my competition. Teams of 3 or 4 people, all with latest generation laptops, matching t-shirts with their private universities' logos, talking fluently about their connections in Silicon Valley or their mentors at important tech companies. And then there was me, alone, with my second-hand computer and my algorithm as my only company. The judges began to tour the different booths. Among them, I recognized several prominent faces from the American tech ecosystem, including Ernest Wright, founder of TechVision, one of the most successful companies in the country. When they reached my booth, I explained my project, a data compression algorithm that could reduce battery consumption in mobile applications by up to 45%, maintaining the same speed and functionality. "Interesting," said Ernest, surprising me with his attention. "But there are dozens of compression algorithms on the market. What makes yours special?" It was the question I had been waiting for. I deployed a real-time demonstration, comparing my algorithm's performance with industry standards. "As you can see," I explained as the numbers appeared on screen, "my algorithm not only compresses more, but does so requiring fewer processing cycles. This translates directly to battery savings and a smoother experience for the end user." Ernest frowned, clearly intrigued. "Where did you study? I don't recognize your face from the usual circuit." "State University of New Mexico," I replied, noticing how some jury members exchanged looks of surprise or skepticism. "And are you currently working with any company?" Ernest continued. "No, I tried to get into Tech Innovate recently, but..." I paused, deciding not to mention the humiliating rejection. "I'm developing this project independently." Ernest nodded slowly, looking at my code carefully. I'd like to see more. Can you demonstrate with this application? He asked, showing me his phone with a popular streaming app. For the next 10 minutes, I integrated my algorithm with the application, demonstrating how it reduced data and battery consumption without affecting video quality. The rest of the jury, who initially seemed uninterested, began to pay attention. Impressive, Ernest finally murmured. Truly impressive. The jury continued their tour, but I noticed how Ernest kept glancing at me as they evaluated other projects. Maybe I had managed to get his attention, but would it be enough to win? The hours passed with agonizing slowness. I observed the other participants, many receiving visits from friends, family, or mentors encouraging them. I was still alone, constantly refreshing my presentation, looking for any detail I could improve. Finally, the moment of the announcement came. All participants gathered in front of the stage as the presenter took the microphone. In third place, he announced, the Bit Solutions team from MIT. Polite applause as the team went up to receive their prize. In second place, Carlos Martinez with his data minimizer compression algorithm. Second place. Not enough for the investor round, but still a validation of my work. As I accepted my $5,000 prize, I noticed Ernest Wright, founder of TechVision, watching me intently. Your algorithm is remarkable, he said, approaching me after the ceremony. I'd like to offer you a partnership, not just a job. What do you say? I couldn't believe it. One of the most successful tech entrepreneurs in America saw value in me when Tech Innovate couldn't. Why me? I asked cautiously. Because talent can come from anywhere, he answered simply, and I recognize it when I see it. I accepted his offer on the spot. The next 3 years transformed everything. Optima Tech, the company we built around my algorithm, grew exponentially. We had a team of brilliant engineers, multi-million-dollar contracts, and technology that outperformed everything on the market. My personal life changed too. I moved from Queens to Brooklyn Heights. I paid off my parents' mortgage. My sister got into Columbia with a full scholarship, but I still covered all her expenses. My mother's diabetes treatments were no longer a financial worry. I was succeeding beyond my wildest dreams, but there was still one memory I couldn't shake. That humiliating interview at Tech Innovate. Then came the news that changed everything. Tech Innovate is in serious trouble, Ernest told me one morning, showing me a financial report. Their new data platform is failing catastrophically. Their stock has plummeted 30% in a week. I read the details carefully. Tech Innovate had bet everything on a new data processing platform, but technical failures made it practically unusable. Clients were canceling contracts, and investors were panicking. This could be an opportunity, Ernest suggested. Optima Tech could step in and save their platform. We could offer them a license deal or what? I asked, intrigued. Or we could acquire their data division, the one that's failing. I sat back, stunned by the suggestion. The idea of acquiring part of Tech Innovate, the same company that had shown me the door 3 years ago, seemed like something from a revenge fantasy. Is that even possible? I asked. They're desperate. Their investors are pushing for immediate solutions or considering selling parts of the company to recover something from their investment. We spent weeks preparing a formal offer. Optima Tech had grown enough to make such a corporate move possible. Finally, the day came to present our offer to Tech Innovate's board. I dressed carefully that morning, choosing a tailored suit and Italian shoes. Not out of vanity, but because I understood the language of corporate power. I knew appearances mattered in these circles. When I entered Tech Innovate's headquarters, I couldn't help remembering the last time I'd been there. Nervous, insecure, with my only tie and a resume nobody wanted to read carefully. This time, however, I was greeted with reverence by the reception staff and escorted to their main boardroom. Around a black marble table sat Tech Innovate's top executives and investors. And there, with tense expressions, were 3 familiar faces. Jason Fuller, now with premature gray at his temples, Amanda Reynolds, whose arrogance seemed considerably diminished, and Richard Blackwell, who maintained his haughty pose though his eyes revealed concern. None of them recognized me immediately. Why would they? To them, I had been just one more rejected candidate among hundreds, a forgettable face, a name of no importance. The CEO of Tech Innovate, Edward Morgan, stood to greet me, Mr. Martinez, it's a pleasure to have you with us today. We've heard impressive things about Optima Tech and are eager to hear your proposal. As I sat down, I felt all eyes on me. I connected my presentation to the room's system. My logo appeared on the huge screen. Optima Tech, with a slogan I had personally chosen, revolutionizing the ordinary. Good morning, everyone. I began with a clear, confident voice. Before getting into the technical and financial details of our proposal, let me introduce myself properly. Some of you might remember me. I looked directly at Jason, Amanda, and Richard. I saw confusion on their faces, followed slowly by a flash of recognition and, finally, disbelief. My name is Carlos Martinez. 3 years ago, I had a job interview at this very company. I was rejected because, as I was told, I didn't have the right profile. I paused, letting my words sink in. Today, I'm here as founder and CEO of Optima Tech, a company valued at $50 million, to discuss the potential acquisition of your data processing division. The silence in the room was absolute. Jason Fuller visibly paled. Amanda Reynolds straightened in her chair, unable to meet my gaze. Richard Blackwell looked like he'd seen a ghost. Life takes strange turns, doesn't it? I added, allowing myself a small smile. It wasn't revenge I sought, but redemption. I didn't want to humiliate them as they had humiliated me. I wanted to prove they were wrong, that I always had value, though they couldn't see it. Edward Morgan, unaware of the underlying drama, encouraged me to continue with the presentation. For the next hour, I detailed how Optima Tech could integrate and revitalize Tech Innovate's failing platform, improving its performance and saving the company's reputation. When I finished, there was a moment of silence before the applause began. It was genuine applause of professional admiration. I even saw Richard nodding with approval at some particularly innovative technical aspects. Impressive, Edward finally said. Truly impressive. I believe I speak for everyone when I say your proposal deserves serious consideration. As the executives discussed among themselves, I noticed Jason Fuller leaning toward me. Mr. Martinez, he said quietly, with a mixture of embarrassment and forced respect. I don't know if you remember me, but I remember you perfectly, Mr. Fuller, I politely interrupted. You led my job interview 3 years ago. We clearly made an error in judgment, he continued, visibly uncomfortable. Don't worry about it, I replied with a genuine smile. If I had gotten that job, I probably never would have founded Optima Tech. So, in a way, I should thank you. The meeting continued with technical and financial discussions. We agreed that our legal teams would meet to define the details of the deal. When we finally stood up to say goodbye, Edward walked me to the elevator. I must say, Carlos, I have rarely seen such a solid presentation, he commented. Your technology is exactly what we need. Thank you, Edward. I think we can build something important together. As we waited for the elevator, I saw Richard Blackwell approaching with a hesitant step. He stopped in front of me, extending his hand. Mr. Martinez, he said in a voice that tried to maintain its usual authority but betrayed certain humility. I would like to personally apologize for our previous interaction. It was unprofessional on my part. I took his hand and shook it firmly. I appreciate your apology, Mr. Blackwell. I hope we can work together productively in the future. The elevator arrived and I entered, leaving them all in the hallway. As the doors closed, I saw in their faces a mixture of respect, regret, and perhaps also some fear about what the future might hold. But what they didn't know was that this was just the beginning. My plan went far beyond acquiring a division of their company. I had my sights set on something much more ambitious, something that would forever change the balance of power between us. The acquisition of Tech Innovate's data processing division was merely the first step. During the following months, we worked tirelessly to integrate both technologies. My team, consisting mainly of young talent from state universities across America, accomplished in 6 months what Tech Innovate's original team hadn't achieved in 2 years: a stable, efficient, and revolutionary platform. Tech Innovate's shares began to recover. Edward Morgan, impressed by our results, offered me a position on his board of directors, which I strategically accepted. This gave me access to privileged information about the company's internal workings and future plans. Jason, Amanda, and Richard were still there. although their attitudes toward me had changed drastically. But the real game was just beginning. My true plan began to take shape 2 months after joining Tech Innovate's board. During a routine financial review, I discovered crucial information. The building housing Tech Innovate's headquarters wasn't owned by the company but operated under a long-term lease contract, and that contract was about to expire. More importantly, the building's owner, an old real estate conglomerate called Central Development Group, was considering selling several assets to finance new developments in Florida. This was the opportunity I'd been waiting for. Secretly, through an investment company created specifically for this purpose, we began negotiations with Central Development Group. The process was long and complex. There were late-night meetings, negotiations in discreet locations, contracts reviewed by trusted lawyers. Everything was handled with extreme confidentiality. Finally, after 3 months of delicate negotiations, we signed the agreement. Optima Tech, through our investment company, had acquired the most emblematic office building on Park Avenue, including the tower where Tech Innovate had its main operations. Edward Morgan had no idea about the transaction. No one in the company knew, except for my small circle of trust. The day I decided to reveal the news, Tech Innovate had convened an extraordinary board meeting. The reason? To discuss a possible corporate restructuring that would include laying off hundreds of employees to reduce costs. The meeting was held in the enormous boardroom on the 50th floor, with panoramic views of the city. All senior executives were present, including, of course, Jason, Amanda, and Richard. Edward Morgan led the meeting with his usual authority. As you all know, despite our partial recovery thanks to the integration with Optima Tech, we still face significant financial challenges. Our investors are demanding drastic measures. He projected a graph showing the areas where cuts would be made. I noticed with concern that most would affect the technical departments, precisely where many young people from backgrounds similar to mine worked. Additionally, Edward continued, to reduce operating expenses, we're considering renegotiating our lease or even relocating to more economical facilities. It was the perfect moment to intervene. On that point, Edward, I said, politely raising my hand, there's something you should know. All eyes turned to me. Calmly, I took a folder from my briefcase and slid it across the table to Edward. What's this? He asked, picking up the folder with evident curiosity. Those are the property documents for this building, I replied calmly. As you can see on page 3, Optima Tech Investments is now the legal owner of this tower and the entire complex. A sepulchral silence fell over the room. Edward browsed through the documents with growing disbelief. Richard looked at me as if seeing an alien. Jason seemed about to faint. This is impossible, Edward finally stammered. How? When? The transaction was completed 2 weeks ago, I explained. And don't worry, I have no intention of evicting you or abruptly increasing the rent. In fact, I have a completely different proposal. I stood up and walked slowly around the table, enjoying, I admit, the moment of absolute power I felt. It wasn't about revenge, I told myself. It was about justice, about balance. My proposal is simple. Instead of firing hundreds of mid- and lower-level technical employees, I suggest a restructuring of senior management. Edward narrowed his eyes. What kind of restructuring? To start, I replied, stopping right behind the chairs of Jason, Amanda, and Richard, I propose creating a new technological innovation department, made up mainly of young talent from state universities across the country. A program that identifies and develops brilliant minds who, due to social or economic circumstances, haven't had the opportunities that others take for granted. I paused, placing my hands on the chairs of my former interviewers. This department will need to be led by executives who truly believe in talent, regardless of its origin. Executives who judge people by their abilities, not by their last names or universities. 5 years have passed since that day in the boardroom when I revealed I owned their building. 5 years of transformation, growth, and revolution in the American tech industry. What began as my personal story of redemption has become a much larger movement, a paradigm shift in how talent is valued in our country. Today is a special day. We're inaugurating the Tech Innovate Optima Tech Campus in New Mexico, in the same small town where I grew up. an educational and development complex that will provide opportunities to young people from rural and marginalized communities throughout the state. As I tour the facilities before the official ceremony, I can't help but be flooded with memories. This ultra-modern building, with its cutting-edge laboratories and collaborative creation spaces, stands on the same land where there were once empty fields. Fields where my father worked before becoming a construction worker. My father, who now walks proudly by my side, observes with amazement the classrooms where hundreds of young people like I once was will learn to code, to design, to create. His hands, still marked by decades of physical work, touch with reverence the walls that others built, but that he, somehow, helped make possible with his sacrifice. My mother and sister are waiting for us in the main auditorium. My sister, now graduated with honors in computer science, leads one of our most innovative research teams. My mother, whose diabetes is finally under control thanks to treatments we can now easily afford, smiles with that mixture of pride and serenity that only mothers know how to express. Among the attendees, I recognize familiar faces. Jason is there, now fully dedicated to our talent identification program in vulnerable communities. He's lost weight, his hair is completely gray, but there's an energy and passion in him that he never had as HR director at the old Tech Innovate. Amanda has also come to my surprise. After 3 years abroad, she returned to the States with a transformed perspective. She now runs a nonprofit organization that promotes the inclusion of women in technology, with special emphasis on girls from marginalized backgrounds. And Richard is in the front row with his team. His bias-free recruitment startup has grown exponentially, changing how hundreds of companies hire talent across America. Ernest Wright, my mentor and partner, takes the stage to begin the ceremony. At 60, he still has that magnetic presence that inspires confidence and respect. 8 years ago, Ernest begins, a young man from this very town revolutionized our industry with a brilliant algorithm. But what really changed everything wasn't his technology, but his vision of a world where talent is valued above privilege, where opportunities are within everyone's reach, regardless of their background or circumstances. Later, as the sun sets over my hometown, illuminating with its last rays this new campus that symbolizes future and hope, I think of that insecure young man I once was, the one who left an interview with a broken heart and wounded dignity, the one who sat on a bench on Park Avenue looking at a building that seemed unreachable to him. I wish I could tell him not to give up, that his worth isn't determined by an interview, or a rejection, or the opinion of those who can't see beyond their prejudices. I wish I could tell him that one day, he'll not only enter that building with his head held high, but will transform the entire industry, that he'll change lives, that he'll open doors for hundreds of young people like him, that one day he'll be able to look back and understand that those who told him he was nobody were wrong, because he always was somebody, someone with the potential to change the world, and he did.
If this story touched your heart, if you identified with that moment when everyone ignored your worth until someone finally saw your potential, I ask you to help me share this message of hope. Every like is a hug for those who feel invisible today in their jobs, their families, or their social circles. Every comment builds a community where we all feel heard. And every subscription allows me to continue sharing these stories that remind us that everyone, absolutely everyone, deserves to be valued. If you know someone who's going through a difficult time, where they feel that no one recognizes their effort, share this video. It might be exactly what they need to hear today. Remember that great transformations begin with small acts of courage, like Lucia noticing Miguel's talent. Perhaps you can be that person for someone else. See you in the next story. Your support makes each one of them possible. Thank you for being here.